Is science fiction really fiction, or is it just the future waiting to happen?
I've been having dreams.
Have you ever seen a world in a film that's different from ours, but it may actually exist? That is what Dune has achieved.
Let's get started.
Adapting Dune has been a challenge for many since the book was released over 50 years ago. None of the directors could truly capture the soul of Frank Herbert's novel.
It's very easy to get lost into the concepts, into the scale, but at the end of the day, it's very powerful and complex story.
It's a story that takes you 20,000 years into the future, to a vast interstellar empire, full of brand new technologies, its own ecosystem, and filled with hundreds of sophisticated elements. The world of Dune is so complex and unique that for a long time it seemed almost impossible to make a movie out of it, and more than that, convincing, until Denis Villeneuve stepped in.
There's so many ideas in the movie that are complex, are foreign, or are strange, that I wanted the audience to have some ground. I wanted the design to be inspired by nature, the light, the wind, the dust, to feel that these worlds, these were real natural environments.
Frank Herbert created a complicated world that relied heavily on biology. Denis Villeneuve didn't want to overthink that, so instead of explaining the complexities, he relied on getting as many realistic environmental shots as possible to ground the audience in that world.
We needed to be in the real environment, so we will be inspired by the infinity.
While you watch Villeneuve's Dune, you don't have to know the backstory of Arrakis to understand that it's a mysterious, dangerous place. You can feel it, even when it comes to a giant sandworm.
The sandworm is one of the most iconic things about Dune. We have to believe that these are real creatures, and in the case of the way the Fremen view them, almost godlike.
We studied real-world desert camouflage creatures to understand how they would interact with their own environments, to understand how sand might propagate if a giant creature is pushing its way through folding sand dunes.
The film didn't expand further about where the sandworms came from and why they were dangerous. Too much detail could have overwhelmed the story, and Denis Villeneuve wanted to keep the story as simple as possible. Even if the viewers got lost in the royal houses and their political games, they'd still understand that.
Spice is to Dune what oil is to our world.
But when the concepts became out of the ordinary, it was necessary to delve deeper. The technologies of Dune are so different from ours that at first it's not clear how to visualize them. Take the blade fights, for example.
It's a cross mix between martial arts and fencing, where you do a certain amount of movement to distract the opponent in order to be able to bring the blade inside his shield.
The shield protects the wearer from fast-moving objects, such as bullets. That's why you don't see guns in Dune. You see knives. In 1984, with visual effects in its infancy, David Lynch could only accomplish this. Villeneuve's team used a simple, artistic idea to visualize how the shields work. If it's blue, it means a person underneath is safe. If the shield turns red, it means the shield has been penetrated and the person is in trouble. While this visual representation was simple and clear, the real challenge lay in crafting the ornithopters.
In the book, it's described as kind of a plane that use a propelling system that looks like a bird, ornithopter. It's like a kind of challenge to bring that to the screen because it can either look fantastic or very silly.
The crew did a number of sketches on the ornithopters and ultimately decided to move a little away from the book's description.
I was trying to get closer to the idea of an insect instead of a bird, because there will be a feeling of power and a feeling that will look more realistic.
Villeneuve's ornithopters may differ from the description in the book, but they are true to the spirit of Frank Herbert. And most importantly, they looked very convincing.
I want my mother to believe that this thing can fly for real.
Another big challenge was creating believable locations.
I'm a strong believer that you must build as much as possible because it will influence the imagination of the actors. It will influence myself as a director.
The production designers would fill each of the sets with tons of practical details.
The production design is futuristic, but it's ancient.
that would be crucial and realistic to the environment they exist in.
It's natural that they wanted to build something that would stand the force of nature. Very little windows to convey the feeling of a bunker because they want to protect themselves from the heat.
And some details were designed to tell a story about the characters. For example, in the case of our main hero, Paul, his bedroom on Arrakis was designed so that you could understand his inner state.
But this is the bed. For me, it was important to have this sense of someone who is being squeezed and could be crushed at any moment.
The same goes for costume design.
I wanted the costume design to be like from another world. Every single little thing to be designed with the complexity and style.
The amount of work the costume designers did was just unbelievable.
They did over 200 specialty costumes, some of which were very complicated to put together.
The designers created about 1,000 looks for the three main worlds of the movie: Arrakis, Caladan, and Getty Prime.
We looked at tons of medieval references, medieval nuns, for the Bene Gesserits. It was a wealth of places from the past to create the future.
One of my favorite images is when the Reverend Mother lands and she walks out of the ship with the following Bene Gesserit women, and they look like scarabs.
And to get a sense of how unpleasant and disgusting the Harkonnens were, the costume designers went back to basics.
Harkonnens are very bug-inspired, with layers and scales and crusts. Even their helmet is very ant-like.
But perhaps the thing that tied it all together was the sound design.
Usually sound is in what's called post-production, but Denis recognizes the value of developing the soundscape as he's shooting the film and as the editor is developing the cut.
One of the most iconic elements of Frank Herbert's book is the voice.
I think the voice was a big challenge because it had to sound like a real thing. It had to sound natural and not like a synthesizer effect.
We came up with this idea of summoning the voices of their ancestors, which would be brought out as he tried to summon his own voice.
The Dune sound designers developed a voice for everything in the movie, even for the desert.
Sand itself in large masses at the right humidity and temperature makes these beautiful whale-like groans, and it almost makes the desert like it's its own character.
And of course, the heart of the adaptation was the score. Like Denis Villeneuve, the legendary composer Hans Zimmer was a huge fan of the book.
He kept saying to me, those sounds cannot be heard before. And so he created new instruments, a new musical language.
The goal for Hans Zimmer and his team was to create a score that sounded like it was being played on instruments from another planet by an unknown culture, to convince the audience that what they were hearing was composed by a civilization that could possibly exist somewhere in the distant future.
And then ended up spending forever making sounds, making instruments, getting people to learn how to play instruments in a different way.
Part of what I love about the score is how unfamiliar it is. It is wholly original and very specific to the film.
In Dune, rhythm is everything. Rhythm is life, and rhythm, most important, can be death.
Making Denis Villeneuve's Dune was special in every way. The crew went to great lengths to capture Frank Herbert's imagination, driven by one thing.
I wanted to have the people who had read the book to feel that all the love and the respect and the reverence I had for Frank Herbert. And so I said, we will not express ourselves. We will try to bring Herbert to the screen as much as possible. One thing I know is that we did it.
The mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience.